Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. Leo, my son, why are you wearing my clothes? The question was never spoken aloud, but I heard it in my mind every time my mother's footsteps padded down the hallway past my bedroom door. Leo, my son, why are you wearing my clothes? It was a ghost of a question, a whisper of a fear, and tonight, it was screaming in my ears as I stood before her closet once again, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. It was a crisp autumn night in Wellesley, Massachusetts. I was 15, my parents were at some charity gala, one of those events where my father would network and my mother would look beautiful in a dress that cost more than my first car probably would. The house was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer and the frantic thumping of my own blood. This silence was my accomplice, my opportunity. I pushed her bedroom door open, the hinges giving a soft, conspiratorial creak. The room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of a single lamp she'd left on. It smelled like her, a soft, powdery scent of Chanel No. 5 and something uniquely maternal that I could never quite name. Her closet doors were slightly ajar, a silent invitation. My hands trembled as I slid them open. Before me hung her world, silks and cashmeres and soft cottons, arranged in a perfect spectrum of color. This was my sanctuary and my greatest source of terror. My fingers brushed against the fabrics, a thrill shooting up my arm. It was a sin, I knew. Boys didn't do this. Leo didn't do this. But I couldn't stop. My eyes landed on the sweater. It was a beautiful jade green cashmere, the color of her eyes when the sun hit them just right. I'd seen her wear it dozens of times, usually with a simple black skirt. It was her effortlessly chic look. As she called it, I carefully lifted the hanger, the soft wool cool against my fingertips. I slipped off my own shapeless gray sweatshirt, my boy smell of sweat and deodorant suddenly feeling crude and alien in this feminine space. I pulled the cashmere sweater over my head, the moment it settled onto my shoulders. A wave of something warm and calming washed over me. The fabric was impossibly soft against my skin, a gentle caress. It fit loosely, but it felt right. I breathed in, and her scent enveloped me. For a moment, it felt like she was hugging me. Next, the skirt, a simple black midi skirt made of a heavy fabric that swished when you moved. I found it, my fingers working clumsily with the zipper at my back. It was a foreign motion, awkward and slow. Finally, I heard the click as the zipper reached the top. The fabric settled around my waist and hips, an enclosure that felt less like a trap and more like a confirmation. It hugged me in a way boys' clothes never did. They hung. This held. I stood there for a long moment, just feeling it, the softness of the sweater on my arms, the weight of the skirt against my legs. Then, I turned to the full-length mirror mounted on the back of the door, and I saw her. Not my mother, someone else, a girl with my dark hair, but with a softer look in her eyes, a girl whose shoulders didn't seem quite so broad in the gentle drape of the cashmere, a girl whose posture seemed to change, her hips swaying slightly as she shifted her weight. For the first time in my life, I didn't see Leo. I saw someone who felt more real than the boy who had walked into this room just minutes ago. The initial shame, the gut-twisting fear of being caught, it all just melted away. In its place was a feeling so profound, so overwhelming. It buckled my knees. It was the feeling of coming home, of finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing, and realizing it was the most important piece of all. Tears began to stream down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The reflection in the mirror blurred, the girl's face becoming a watercolor painting of my own joy and grief. Joy for this discovery, and grief for all the years I had lived without it. I don't know how long I stood there, just looking, just being. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. The spell was only broken by the distant crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My parents, they were home early. My movements became a frantic, clumsy ballet. The skirt came off, the zipper snagging in my haste. The sweater was pulled over my head, messing up my hair. I tried to fold them, to put them back exactly as I'd found them, but my hands were shaking too badly. I hung them back in the closet, praying they looked undisturbed. I slipped back into my own clothes, the rough cotton of my t-shirt feeling like sandpaper against my newly sensitized skin. I fled her room, pulling the door shut behind me, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my chest. Lying in my own bed a few minutes later, I could hear their voices downstairs, the gentle murmur of my mother and the deeper timbre of my father. I was back in Leo's body, in Leo's room, but my mind was still in front of that mirror. The image of the girl in the green sweater was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. That night, my past started to make a terrifying kind of sense. I remembered being 6 years old at my birthday party. All the boys were playing with new action figures and superhero capes, but all I wanted was the sparkling princess tiara my cousin had worn. I'd reached for it, and my father's hand had gently but firmly pulled mine away. His voice wasn't angry, but it was thick with a disappointment that felt so much worse. "That's for girls, Leo," he'd said with a tight smile. "Boys play with superheroes." I remembered being 10, on the school playground. A group of older boys had cornered me, pushing me against the chain-link fence. "You run like a girl," one of them sneered. "You talk like a girl." I hadn't understood what they meant, only that it was an accusation, something to be ashamed of. From that day on, I learned to perform. I consciously deepened my voice. I learned to sit with my legs apart, to take up space. I joined the baseball team even though I hated the grit of the dirt and the sting of the ball in the glove. I built Leo, brick by painful brick, burying the person underneath. Sleep was impossible. The questions churned in my mind. What was wrong with me? Was I sick? Was I the only person in the world who felt this way at 2 a.m.? I crept out of bed and opened my laptop, the bright screen hurting my eyes in the dark. I typed the most honest question I'd ever asked into the Google search bar. Why do I want to be a girl? The results flooded the screen. I clicked on forums, articles, personal blogs, and then I saw it, a word I had heard before, but never truly understood: transgender. A definition appeared, denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sick. I wasn't a freak. I was transgender. It was a real thing. Other people, thousands of them, felt this exact same way. I fell down a rabbit hole of Reddit threads and YouTube videos, reading stories of people who had felt the same disconnect, the same secret shame, the same longing. They talked about something called gender dysphoria, and it was like reading a diagnostic manual of my own soul. I read for hours, until the first hint of dawn began to gray the window. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt sane. I wasn't alone. In one of the forums, a woman shared how she chose her new name. She said she'd asked her mother what she would have been named if she'd been born a girl. That idea resonated deep within me. I remember my mom telling me a story once about how she and Dad had a girl's name picked out before the ultrasound revealed I was a boy. The name was Lily. I whispered it into the darkness of my room. Lily. It felt as soft and as right as the cashmere sweater. It felt like my name. My internal conflict didn't vanish, but it shifted. The question was no longer, what's wrong with me, but what do I do now? A tiny seed of hope began to sprout in the barren soil of my heart. I wasn't a monster. I was just Lily, and I made a promise to that reflection in the mirror, to the girl in the green sweater. Lily would live, even if it was only in secret, in the quiet solitude of my locked room. She would live. The next 2 years were a masterclass in duality. I lived 2 lives, walled off from each other by the door to my bedroom. By day, I was Leo. By night, I was Lily. Mornings were the hardest. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, and stare into Leo's eyes. I saw the sharp angle of his jaw, the faint stubble starting to emerge on his upper lip, the Adam's apple that bobbed when he swallowed, and behind his eyes, I would think about Lily. I'd imagine her face, softer, her lips with a touch of color, her eyes defined with a subtle line of black. It was like living with a ghost, only the ghost was the real me. At school, I played my part with robotic precision. On the baseball field, my friends would slap me on the back and call me bro. I'd grunt in response, chew gum, and spit like the other guys. I went to parties where boys would brag about their pathetic conquests, and I would nod along, feeling like a spy in a foreign country, a fraud who had memorized the local customs but could never understand the language. Family dinners were a special kind of torture. My father, a successful corporate lawyer, would talk about my future. It was always assumed, never discussed. Cornell, his alma mater, then Harvard Law. He'd map out my life as if it were a legal brief, logical and predetermined. Leo will make a fine lawyer, he'd say to my mother, his chest puffed with pride. He's got the right mind for it. My mother would smile, her beautiful face glowing with love. He's growing into such a handsome young man, she'd say, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her touch was warm, but her words felt like ice picks in my heart. Every compliment directed at Leo was an erasure of Lily. But then, the sun would set, and my second act would begin. My art of transformation became more sophisticated. I got a part-time job at a local bookstore and used the cash to buy things online, shipping them to my friend Matt's house. Matt was the only one who knew, not everything, but enough. He thought it was a weird kink, but he was a good friend, loyal and discreet. He never judged. He just handed me the plain brown boxes with a shrug. My secret collection grew, hidden in a false bottom I'd built into my deepest dresser drawer. It started with simple things: a soft bralette, silky panties that felt divine against my skin. Then came the clothes: a simple A-line skirt, a few soft blouses, a pair of women's skinny jeans that hugged my legs in a way I adored. Then came the makeup. I spent hours locked in my room, my laptop open to YouTube tutorials. I learned the delicate art of eyeliner from a bubbly girl with pink hair, how to blend eyeshadow from a drag queen with impeccable technique, how to find the right shade of foundation from a beauty guru who spoke with a soothing, hypnotic voice. Each step was a revelation. The first time I successfully drew a clean, sharp wing with liquid eyeliner, I felt like an artist who had just completed a masterpiece. The sweep of mascara, making my lashes look longer and thicker, transformed my eyes completely. They looked bigger, more expressive. The first time I applied lipstick, a soft, rosy nude, the sensation was electric. My lips, a part of my body I'd never given a second thought, suddenly felt defined and intentional. Putting on the clothes was the final piece of the ritual. I remember the first time I put on a padded bra. I clipped it shut at the back, another awkward motion I had to learn. And when I looked down, I saw a gentle curve under my shirt. It wasn't real, not yet, but it was a promise. My heart did a wild little flip-flop in my chest. I'd twirl in front of my mirror in a simple floral sundress, feeling the fabric of the skirt flare out and brush against my shins. It was a feeling of freedom, of uninhibited joy, that Leo never ever got to experience. This double life was sustainable for a while, but the walls between my two worlds were beginning to crack. The breaking point came the night of my acceptance dinner. I'd gotten into Cornell. Early decision, it was what my parents had always wanted, what I had been programmed to achieve. The house was filled with family, aunts, uncles, cousins. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's roast chicken and the sound of congratulatory chatter. "Leo will be a third-generation legacy at Cornell," my uncle boomed, raising his wine glass. "He'll be a great lawyer, just like his father," my aunt added with a warm smile. My father put his arm around my shoulders, his grip firm and proprietary. "My son," he said to the room, his voice thick with pride, "a bright future ahead of him." Every word was a nail in my coffin. I was suffocating, drowning in their expectations for a person I wasn't. They were celebrating the death of Lily, the entombment of my true self. I couldn't breathe. Making an excuse about a headache, I fled upstairs to my room. I looked at myself in the mirror. Leo's face stared back, his eyes hollow with despair. I hated him. I hated his face, his body, his name. I hated the lie he forced me to live. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go to Cornell and spend 4 more years pretending. I couldn't spend the rest of my life as Leo. The thought was not just unbearable, it was a death sentence. If I have to live as Leo for the rest of my life, a quiet, calm voice said in my head, I would rather not live at all. That was it. That was the moment the fear of leaving became smaller than the fear of staying. My movements became swift and deliberate. I pulled 2 large suitcases from the top of my closet into one. I packed Leo's life jeans, hoodies, sneakers, and my Cornell acceptance letter into the other. I carefully folded Lily's entire world, her dresses, her makeup, her blouses, her heels, my secret heart, packed away in nylon and zippers. I went to my desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. My hands were steady now. The desperation had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure resolve. Mom, Dad, I wrote. I'm so sorry to do this. Please don't think this is your fault. It's not. There's just something I have to figure out on my own. I need some time to find myself. I love you both more than you can ever know. Please don't worry. Leo. I signed his name for the last time. I left the note on my pillow, propped up where they would see it. I took all the cash I had saved, nearly $2,000, and my laptop. At 3 a.m., with the house silent around me, I slipped out the back door, carrying one life in each hand, and walked away into the darkness, towards a city where no one knew my name, towards a place where Lily could finally be born. The Greyhound bus hissed to a stop at Port Authority at 6 a.m. The air that hit my face as I stepped onto the pavement was thick with the smell of exhaust, rain, and roasted pretzels. It was a gloomy, drizzling morning, but to me, the gray concrete canyons of New York City looked like the promised land. I found a cheap hostel in Brooklyn that I'd booked online. The room was tiny, the paint was peeling, and the window looked out onto a brick wall, but it was mine. I dropped the 2 suitcases on the floor with a thud. They sat there, side by side, Leo and Lily, a choice. I looked at my reflection in the cheap, warped mirror above the dresser. The tired, scared face of Leo stared back. I raised my hand in a small, final wave. Goodbye, I whispered. It felt less like a farewell and more like an exorcism. The transformation was not instantaneous. It happened in small, terrified steps. During the first week, my uniform was a pair of women's skinny jeans, a band t-shirt, and an oversized hoodie. It was androgynous enough to be safe, but the fit of the jeans, the way they hugged my thighs and calves, was a private, constant reminder of my intent. Every time I stepped out onto the street, my heart hammered against my ribs. I was sure everyone was staring, pointing, whispering, but they weren't. New York was too big, too busy, too wrapped up in its own drama to care about one more kid in tight jeans. That anonymity was the most liberating feeling I had ever experienced. The second week, I got bolder. I bought a cheap stick of black eyeliner from a drugstore. In the dim light of my hostel room, I carefully applied a thin, subtle line to my upper lash line. It was barely noticeable, but I felt like I was wearing a neon sign. Walking down the street, my hands were sweating. I ordered a coffee from a street vendor, my voice coming out as a nervous squeak. The man, weathered and perpetually bored, handed me my cup. Here you go, miss, he grunted, already looking past me to the next customer. Miss. The word shot through me like a jolt of electricity. My heart didn't just jump, it felt like it did a full gymnastic floor routine. He'd seen me. Maybe it was the eyeliner. Maybe it was my hair, which I'd started to let grow out. It didn't matter. In one casual, throwaway word, a stranger had validated my entire existence. I walked away from that cart feeling like I was floating. By the end of the first month, I was ready. I'd found a simple black midi skirt and a soft gray cardigan at a thrift store. It was a safe, unassuming outfit, but it was unequivocally feminine. I paired it with a pair of black flats, standing in front of my mirror. I felt a familiar mix of terror and elation. This was it, no more hiding in androgyny. Walking out onto the street was one of the bravest things I've ever done. The cool morning air on my bare legs was a shocking, wonderful sensation. The fabric of the skirt swished against my calves as I walked. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet more powerful than I had ever felt as Leo. I walked with my head held high, forcing myself to meet the eyes of passers-by. Most didn't even glance twice. I walked into a small cafe in Williamsburg. The barista, a young woman with a constellation of piercings, gave me a warm, easy smile. "What can I get for you, honey?" she asked. I ordered a latte, and my voice, to my own surprise, sounded calmer and a little higher than usual. The anxiety was still there, but it was being drowned out by a rising tide of euphoria. This was working. I could do this. I could be this person, out here in the world. Survival, however, required more than just courage. My savings were dwindling fast. I pounded the pavement, applying for any job that would hire me. I ended up with a patchwork of employment: a 6 a.m. shift as a barista, a lunchtime waitressing gig at a small diner, and a soul-crushing but necessary data entry job I could do from my tiny new studio apartment in Queens. The apartment was barely bigger than a closet, but it was my own space, Lily's space. My life fell into a new rhythm. I'd work, come home exhausted, and then spend hours building Lily. I shopped exclusively at thrift stores, slowly curating a wardrobe that felt like me. I learned how to style my growing hair, how to apply foundation to cover the faint shadow on my upper lip, how to walk in a way that felt natural and graceful. Every small success was a victory. But it was a lonely existence. At night, the city lights would blink outside my window, and a profound sense of isolation would wash over me. I missed my parents. I missed the comfort of my old life. Even as I'd hated it, I'd call home once a week, forcing my voice down into Leo's familiar register, telling them I was fine, that I was just on a post-high school travel adventure. "When are you coming home?" my mother would ask, her voice tight with worry. "I miss you, sweetie." "Soon, Mom, I miss you too." I'd lie, my heart aching with guilt. I would hang up the phone and cry, the tears blurring the reflection of the girl in the window. The real turning point didn't come from a new outfit or a makeup technique. It came from a flyer I saw tacked to a bulletin board at a community center: LGBTQ+ youth support group, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. All are welcome. The following Wednesday, I stood outside the door to that room in the West Village for a full 10 minutes before I got up the nerve to go in. I sat in the circle of plastic chairs, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and just listened. A young man talked about being kicked out of his home. A non-binary person spoke about their struggle to get their professors to use the right pronouns. A trans woman, a few years older than me, shared her anxieties about starting hormone therapy. Their stories were different from mine, but the feelings underneath the fear, the loneliness, the desperate need to be seen for who they really are were exactly the same. They were my feelings. I went back the next week, and the week after that, on the third week, the group facilitator looked at me with kind eyes. "Would you like to share anything tonight?" My throat went dry. My heart started to pound, but I looked around the circle at the encouraging faces, and I took a deep breath. "Hi," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is Lily." It was the first time I had ever said it out loud to other people. The name, my name, hung in the air, real and solid. A warm smile spread across the facilitator's face. The others smiled too. Someone started a soft, gentle clap, and then the whole room joined in. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was a quiet, profound welcome. "Welcome, Lily," someone said. And I cried. For the third time on this journey, I cried. But these weren't tears of relief or sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated belonging. That group became my lifeline, my family. For the first time, I had friends who knew me as Lily. We'd go out for coffee, go dancing at a gay bar in Hell's Kitchen. The first time a man approached me at the bar, a kind-eyed guy with a nice smile, and asked, "Can I buy you a drink?" I blushed so hard I thought my face would catch fire. I nodded shyly, and as he ordered our drinks, my friends gave me a collective, beaming thumbs up. He saw a woman. He saw me. I was learning to navigate the world as myself. I was building a life. But as the external pieces of Lily fell into place, an internal disconnect grew more pronounced. My makeup was flawless. My outfits were cute. I had learned to walk in low heels without wobbling. But when I took it all off at night and looked in the mirror, I saw the truth. I saw broad shoulders, a flat chest, a man's jawline. My soul and my reflection were still at war. I had found my name, but I hadn't yet found my body, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my journey was far from over. Living as Lily full-time for over a year had smoothed out the external performance, but it sharpened the internal pain. The dysphoria, which had once been a vague, humming discomfort, was now a constant, screaming dissonance. It was in the little things. It was trying on a beautiful, form-fitting dress and seeing it hang awkwardly on my broad shoulders and narrow hips. It was the careful, conscious effort to keep my voice in a higher, softer register, a constant performance that left my throat tired and my mind frayed. It was catching my reflection in a shop window and seeing the stark, angular lines of my male facial structure beneath the carefully applied makeup. The mirror became my enemy again. I would spend hours scrutinizing my face, tracing the line of my jaw, the shape of my brow bone. I would look at my flat chest, the source of so much pain. Even with the best padded bras, I knew what was underneath. It felt like I was an imposter in my own life, a beautifully decorated house built on a crumbling foundation. The feeling of not quite right was a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I knew the next step wasn't something I could buy at a thrift store or learn from a YouTube tutorial. I plunged back into the world of online research, but this time my searches were more specific. Hormone replacement therapy, facial feminization surgery, gender confirmation surgery. I learned about the miraculous effects of estrogen, how it softened the skin, redistributed body fat, and most importantly, encouraged breast growth. I read about FFS, a series of procedures designed to soften masculine facial features, shaving down the brow bone, reducing the jaw, refining the nose, and I learned about the final, most profound step for many trans women, GCS, the physical reconstruction that would finally align my body with my identity. As I researched, one country's name kept appearing over and over: Thailand. It was a world-renowned center for these procedures, known for its highly skilled surgeons, state-of-the-art hospitals, and, crucially, its affordability compared to the United States. A plan began to form, ambitious and terrifying. I started adding up the costs, the surgeries, the flights, the recovery time. The number that stared back at me from my spreadsheet was staggering, roughly $25,000. For a young woman working 3 low-wage jobs in New York City, it might as well have been $1 million. But it wasn't a desire. It was a necessity. This wasn't a cosmetic choice. It was a life-saving one. I gave myself a deadline: 2 years. 2 years to save every single penny I could. What followed was a grueling montage of relentless work. I picked up a 4th job, working weekend shifts as a cater waiter. My life became an endless cycle of waking up, working, eating the cheapest possible meals, usually ramen or rice and beans, coming home to sleep for a few hours, and then doing it all over again. Social events became a luxury I couldn't afford. A $10 movie ticket was a week's worth of groceries. My tiny apartment felt more like a charging station than a home. But every deposit I made into my special savings account, which I labeled Lily's Future, was a jolt of hope. Each dollar was a brick in the foundation of my new life. 6 months into my saving plan, I took the first medical step. I found an informed consent clinic in the city that provided hormone replacement therapy. I'll never forget the feeling of holding that first prescription in my hand. It was just a small piece of paper, but it felt like the key to the universe. Later that night, sitting on my bed, I held the tiny blue pill in my palm. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely bring it to my mouth. As I swallowed it with a glass of water, I felt a profound shift inside me. The real change had begun. The effects of the hormones were slow, then sudden. The first sign came after about 2 weeks, a deep, aching tenderness in my chest. I almost cried with joy. It was working. My body was listening. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as my skin grew softer and my face became subtly rounder. One morning, about 3 months in, I stepped out of the shower and noticed them: small, tender buds of breast tissue. They were tiny, barely there, but they were mine. They were real. I sank to my knees on the bath mat and wept, my hands cupping this new, miraculous part of me. The 2 years passed in a blur of exhaustion and anticipation. I watched my bank account grow with a fierce, obsessive focus. $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. The number on the screen was a direct measure of how close I was to becoming whole. Finally, the day came. I made one last deposit, and the balance ticked over $25, $142. I had done it. Booking the flight and wiring the deposit to the hospital in Bangkok felt surreal. The last and most painful step was calling my parents. I had to create one final, elaborate lie. "Hey Mom, Dad," I said, pitching my voice down to Leo's register one last time. "I have some amazing news. I've been offered a spot on a 6-month design project in Asia. It's a huge opportunity." 6 months, my mother's voice was laced with anxiety. "That's so long, Leo, and so far away." "I know," I said, guilt coiling in my stomach. "But it's important for my portfolio. Please, support me on this." I could hear the hesitation, but they eventually agreed, trusting the son they thought they knew. That lie was the heaviest burden I had to carry. Stepping off the plane in Bangkok was like walking into a sauna. The air was thick with humidity and the smells of street food and incense. The hospital was a world away from the chaotic streets, cool, modern, and immaculate. The surgeon I met was professional and kind. He walked me through every procedure with diagrams and 3D models, explaining the risks and the expected results. He didn't see me as a curiosity. He saw me as a patient who needed his help. The night before the surgery, I was alone in my private hospital room. The city lights twinkled outside my window. I stood before the mirror and took one last look at the body I was about to leave behind. I saw the ghost of Leo, his sharp jaw, his flat chest, the body that had felt like a prison for 20 years. I didn't feel hatred for it anymore, just a kind of sad farewell. I climbed into the crisp hospital bed and wrote in my journal, "Tomorrow I will be reborn. Tomorrow the person on the outside will finally match the person on the inside. Goodbye, Leo. Hello, Lily." Fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it lay a bedrock of unshakable resolve. I was ready. Waking up from the 8-hour surgery was a slow, foggy process. The first sensation was pain, a deep, all-encompassing pain that seemed to radiate from every part of my body. I was wrapped in what felt like miles of bandages. I couldn't move. I couldn't see anything. I could only lie there, drifting in and out of a morphine haze, attended to by the gentle Thai nurses who spoke to me in soft, soothing tones. The first week was a blur of pain management and healing. Then they began to remove the bandages. First, from my chest, a nurse carefully unwrapped the gauze, and I looked down. Through the swelling and bruising, I could see them 2 beautiful, natural-looking breasts. They were perfectly proportioned to my frame. They were real. They were me. Tears of joy streamed down my face, mixing with the sweat on my temples. A few days later, the bandages came off my face. I was swollen and bruised beyond recognition, but even through the distortion, I could see the changes. My brow was smoother, my jawline was softer, my nose was smaller and more refined. The recovery was slow and arduous. The pain eventually subsided into a dull ache. I learned to walk again. My center of gravity subtly shifted. Each step was a small, painful triumph. I felt a fundamental change in how my body occupied space. After 4 long weeks, most of the swelling had gone down, and all the external bandages were removed. It was time. A nurse helped me walk slowly to the large mirror in my room. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was terrified. What if it wasn't right? What if, after all this, I still didn't see myself? I took a deep breath and looked up. The person staring back at me was a stranger, and yet I knew her more intimately than I had ever known myself. Her face was soft, feminine, and undeniably mine. Her eyes, my eyes, looked back with a clarity I had never seen before. Her body was harmonious, the curves of her chest and hips creating a silhouette that finally made sense. I raised a trembling hand and touched my new cheekbone. This was me. This was the face that had lived in my head for all these years. This was Lily. And in that moment, I noticed something else, a profound silence. The constant, low-frequency hum of gender dysphoria that had been the background noise of my entire life was gone. It had simply vanished. In its place was a quiet, deep, and radical sense of peace. The war was over. I was finally home, in my own skin. I spent another 2 months in Bangkok, recovering in a small serviced apartment. It was a time of gentle rediscovery. I was learning to live inside a body that finally felt like my own. Simple movements, the way I sat, the way I walked, the way I crossed my legs felt different, more natural. I went to spas, had my hair professionally styled and colored, and bought new clothes. This time, they fit perfectly. Every dress I tried on hugged my new curves in a way that made me want to cry with happiness. Back in New York, I slipped back into my life, but everything was different. I was no longer performing. I was simply living. I got a better job at a boutique design firm, my confidence now radiating in interviews. I dated. I made friends. I laughed without a shadow of the old anxieties. I was, for the first time, truly happy. But there was still one piece of my life that remained unresolved, a ghost I had to face, my family. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd left home. Our weekly phone calls were a painful charade. I was now 21 years old, a woman living a full and authentic life. But to my parents, I was still their son, Leo, on a never-ending work trip in Asia. The guilt was a constant weight. Every time I looked at the family photo I kept on my nightstand, I felt a pang of longing for my mother's hug, for my father's quiet presence. I couldn't live a half-truth anymore. They deserved to know their child, the real me, no matter the outcome. I had to tell them. The decision made, a new wave of anxiety washed over me. I spent a week preparing. I booked a flight to Boston. I called them to say I was flying in for a surprise visit for the weekend. My mother's shriek of joy over the phone was both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. "Oh, Leo, I can't wait to see you. It's been too long." "I can't wait to see you too, Mom," I'd said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I agonized over what to wear. I wanted to look like myself, but I didn't want to be shocking. I finally settled on a tasteful knee-length dress in a soft pastel blue, my mother's favorite color, and a simple white cardigan. I styled my hair in gentle waves and applied my makeup with a light, natural touch. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a calm, confident young woman, but inside, I was a terrified child. Will they still love me? The plane ride felt like an eternity. With every mile that passed, my heart beat faster. I rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, but the words kept getting jumbled in my mind. I imagined every possible scenario: my mother fainting, my father yelling, them slamming the door in my face, but there was no turning back. The taxi pulled up to the familiar house in Wellesley. It looked exactly the same, as if frozen in time. The big maple tree on the lawn was ablaze with autumn colors, just as it had been the night I left. I paid the driver, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the cash. I walked up the stone path, my sensible heels clicking softly, each step an echo of the boy who had run away from this very spot. I stood before the dark green door for a full minute, my finger hovering over the doorbell. My heart was a wild animal trapped in my chest, taking one last, ragged breath. I pressed the button. I heard the familiar chime, then footsteps from within, my mother's footsteps. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and there she was. Her hair had more silver in it now, and there were new lines around her eyes. But it was her. She had a bright, expectant smile on her face, ready to greet her son. The smile faltered. Her eyes scanned my face, my dress, my hair. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. To her, I was just a strange woman on her doorstep. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, her head tilted in confusion. My carefully rehearsed speeches vanished. My throat closed up. I opened my mouth, and the voice that came out was not Leo's deep baritone. It was my own, clear and true. "Mom," I whispered. Her brow furrowed. She leaned forward slightly, peering into my face. She was searching for something. And then, her eyes met mine. My eyes. The one feature that hadn't changed. The eyes she had looked into every day for 18 years. Recognition dawned, followed by utter, profound disbelief. She took a half step back, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Her voice was a choked, horrified whisper. "Leo." Tears filled my eyes and began to fall. I shook my head gently. I'm not Leo anymore, Mom. My voice trembled, but I said the words I had come all this way to say. I'm Lily. The silence that followed stretched into an eternity. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air from my lungs. I braced myself for the anger, the rejection, the door slamming shut. But it didn't come. My mother just stared, her eyes tracing every line of my new face, taking in my clothes, my body, and as she looked, the shock in her expression slowly, heartbreakingly, began to melt away, replaced by something else, a dawning, painful understanding. I could see the pieces clicking into place in her mind, the secretiveness, the unhappiness, the running away. She wasn't seeing a monster. She was seeing the lifetime of pain her child had hidden from her. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, and then she closed the distance between us, wrapping her arms around me in a desperate, clinging hug. I collapsed against her, the strength I'd been holding onto for 3 years finally giving way. Oh, my baby, she sobbed into my hair, her body shaking. Why? Why did you have to go through all of this alone? I'm sorry, Mom, I cried, my voice muffled against her shoulder. I'm so sorry. No, she whispered fiercely, pulling back to look at my face, her hands cupping my cheeks. No, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm your mother. I should have known. I should have seen you were hurting. We stood there on the front porch, 2 women holding each other and crying, a mother and a daughter reunited in the strangest, most beautiful way possible. The neighbors probably saw, but in that moment, nothing else in the world existed. She eventually led me inside, into the familiar living room. I sat on the sofa where I'd watched cartoons as a child, only now I sat with my knees together, my purse in my lap. I told them everything, the years of hiding, the secret wardrobe, the discovery online, the loneliness in New York, the jobs, the hormones, the surgeries in Thailand. I laid my entire soul bare. My mother sat beside me, holding my hand, her tears falling silently as she listened. Just as I was finishing, we heard the sound of my father's car in the driveway. A fresh wave of fear washed over me. My father was a good man, but he was more traditional, more rigid in his views. This would be harder for him. He walked in, briefcase in hand, and stopped dead in the entryway. He looked at me, a stranger sitting on his sofa, then at his wife's tear-streaked face. His expression hardened with confusion and suspicion. Honey, what's going on? Who is this? My mother stood up, her hand still gripping mine. David, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This is our child. He stared, his eyes darting between me and my mother. I could see the denial, the refusal to comprehend. I stood up slowly, facing him. Hi, Dad. He looked at me, really looked at me, for a long, silent moment. I saw a flicker of the same recognition that I'd seen in my mother's eyes, followed by a storm of conflicting emotions. He looked lost. Finally, he found his voice, and it was heavy with a pain that broke my heart. Leo! It's Lily now, Dad, I said softly. He didn't speak. He just sank into his armchair, his briefcase slipping from his hand and hitting the floor with a thud. He put his head in his hands. The silence was thick with his grief for the son he thought he had. My mother went to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. After what felt like a lifetime, he looked up at me, his eyes red. He didn't ask about the surgery, or the clothes, or the name. He asked the only question that truly mattered. Are you happy now? A real, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time since I'd arrived. I nodded, a fresh wave of tears blurring my vision. More than I ever thought possible. Dad, I'm finally happy. He stared at me for another long moment. Then he sighed, a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. He opened his arms, a gesture that was both hesitant and profound. Come here, he said, his voice thick. Come here, honey. Welcome home. The days that followed were a gentle process of adjustment. My mother, with the fierce, unconditional love that only a mother can have, adapted quickly. She'd occasionally slip and say Leo, then immediately correct herself with a soft, I mean Lily. Sorry, sweetie. One afternoon, she insisted we go shopping at the mall. It was the mother-daughter experience I had dreamed of my entire life. She helped me pick out a dress, telling me which colors brought out my eyes. She stood outside the dressing room, waiting for me to show her what I was trying on. "Oh, Lily, that one is beautiful on you," she'd exclaimed, her face beaming. I felt so normal, so loved. My father took longer. He was quieter, more reserved, but he tried. He would ask me about my job in New York, about my apartment. One evening, as I was getting ready to head back, he asked me, "Is there anyone special in your life? Anyone looking out for you?" It was a clumsy, roundabout way of asking if I was safe and loved, the eternal question of a concerned father. I smiled. "I can take care of myself, Dad." He nodded slowly. "I know you can," he said, a note of new respect in his voice. "You're the strongest person I know." The night before I left, I was sitting with my mother on the sofa. She was gently brushing my hair, just as she used to when I was a little kid with a skinned knee. "You know," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, "for a long time, I thought I had lost my son. I grieve for Leo." I leaned my head back against her. "You didn't lose anyone, Mom," I said, taking her hand. "You've always had me. I'm just finally me." She smiled through her tears, her fingers stroking my hair. "It feels," she whispered, "like I got to give birth to you all over again. Welcome to the world, my darling Lily." The next morning, as I got into the taxi for the airport, my mom hugged me tight. "Call me when you land," she said, "and use your real voice this time." My dad stood on the porch, a little ways back. He didn't come for a hug, but as the car pulled away, he raised his hand and waved, and I heard him call out, his voice clear in the crisp morning air. "I love you, Lily." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time, they were purely tears of joy. Driving away from the house I had once fled in shame, I felt no more weight, no more secrets. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here. I was Lily, whole and complete. I was loved. My life, my real life, was just beginning.